We're in all kinds of communities, family communities, communities of our own choosing. We have spiritual communities. And it's easy to be peaceful in a community when everything's going my way. And when things don't go my way, I want to kind of push. I want to kind of get my way. And I fall out of peace. I fall out of peace with the community that I'm in, whether it be my family or my church community, and I lose my center. That doesn't mean I lose it for very long, because we're constantly changing. We're constantly moving in and out of peace on a daily or a moment-to-moment basis. I want to talk a little bit about wants and needs, because we get that confused. In community, we'll say, well, I'm thinking of needs are Maslowian's needs. We're talking about food, shelter, clothing, this kind of things. The things we absolutely need to stay, to survive. But then we have the other, the wants. I want to be loved. I want to be famous. I want a new car. I want this. I want that. And of course, that's fine. But when we start confusing wants and needs, we can fall out of harmony. Because if we're not grateful for what we have, that our needs have been met, then our wants can become very confused. And this is what causes disharmony within community, is the fact that we don't place the needs of the community ahead of our wants. And so, I've been in a lot of spiritual communities. I've been on boards. And if you really want to grow spiritually, you join a church or a community. And if you really, really want to grow, you get on a board. Because that's where the conflict, that's where things come together. That's where the sausage is made. And that's the underbelly, and it brings up our shadow. And the important part of community is that it does bring up our shadow, and it brings up where we can do better, where we can be more expansive, more loving, more creative, more engaged, more involved. The angels were floating around this fellow, and this fellow noticed them and said, can you show me what heaven and hell looks like? The angel said, oh, I can abide. Sure, come up to me, hop on my back. Off they go into this big room. And here in the center of this room is this big table, and it smells wonderful in there. There's this great soup in the center of the table. Oh, it's wonderful. And he looks around, and the angel sort of stepped back, and he looks around and sees that everyone's sitting around the table, and they're just bickering, and they're having a bad time, and they're hungry, and they're nasty to one another. And he notices there are spoons on the table, but the spoons are really, really long, so you can reach the soup in the center of the table. And if you bring the soup back, you can't feed yourself. So there's a problem here. And everyone here, it seems, at this table is bickering. They haven't figured out the secret. And so, whoa. And so the angel said, you want to see what works? What heaven looks like? He said, yeah. They go right next door, same exact room, looks like the same kind of people around the table, the same soup, the same spoons, but everyone's having a good time. They're picking up the spoon and they're feeding each other. You want to make a community work? You feed each other. It's only that simple. How do we nourish one another? Not necessarily at our own expense, but sometimes that nourishes us by nourishing others even at our own expense. I know of people, and you've heard of people that have basically sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifice to help somebody else out. You know, the person that jumps in the water to try to save maybe even a dog or something, and ends up getting swept away in the process. These selfless acts. It's amazing. So how do we find peace? Or actually, how do we bring peace to the community? You can only bring what you have. And if you honor what you have as you bring it, knowing that if I am genuine and I bring whatever I have, perhaps that will be uplifted, and perhaps that will be enough, and perhaps something will happen. So you come as you are to community, and we all come as we are to community. And that's where it starts. That's where the polishing starts. That's where the humility starts. And that's where the real spiritual work starts. The spiritual work is not in the scriptures. It's not in the readings. It's in the day-to-day contact with one another and how kindly and appropriately we meet one another. Do we meet on a heart level? Do we meet as defensive? Do we meet through our opinions about who you are? Actually, we meet all those ways. And as we become more conscious of it, we can learn to meet more at a heart level than at a mind level. And that takes practice. And that's kind of the purpose of, we'll call it the Sangha or the spiritual community. In Buddhism, they call it the Sangha. And when they say what's really important, you have the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the Sangha. Why is community so important in Buddhism and in the other religions also? It's where we practice what we're here to learn. We're here to practice giving and receiving love to one another. Is it more than that? I don't think so. And so, when asked, what's the most important? Is it the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, or is it the Sangha? And wisdom tells us it really is the community that's the most important. You can forget everything else, and if you show up in community, that's all you need to do, because that's where you will learn it. It's on-the-job training. And it's on-the-job conflict, especially in the boardroom. So, how do communities fall out of peace? It's very easy. You get somebody coming in that doesn't know the difference between needs and wants to take over, and wants to have it their way, and there starts a disruption. And when that disruption grows and grows and grows, disharmony starts coming in. And that's where the rubber really hits the road, because you can take a community, and if there's any disruptions, you just kick them out. And that makes it easy. And I've been in communities like that. Someone causes problems, you're not being supportive, out you go. But it's more complicated than that. Because there are certain communities where that is a very rough-handed way of going. I was with the Rajanishis up in Oregon. I lived on the commune, and if you weren't to the Bhagwan as he drove by in his Rolls Royces, and if you didn't show up, you were asked, why? Why aren't you gung-ho? I'm not feeling it. I think the emperor has no clothes. I think this is a fraud. I think there's something going on. Well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. There wasn't even a discussion about it. So you cull the herd that way. You get the bad apples out really quickly. But what about leadership? That's when it gets tough. Because what happens when the leader goes bad? And you're not allowed to descend within the group. And I've been in those situations where there have been ministers that have gone off the rails, that weren't appropriate, that need to be fired, that aren't handling the funds appropriately, and so on. I mean, this happens. If you're in touch with the needs of the community, and you really are honoring your commitment to the community to be a spiritually uplifting, it's your obligation to stand up and to say, the emperor has no clothes. There's something amiss here. And most of the time, we don't say that. It's too threatening. It's just too threatening. You will be kicked out. You'll be called a heretic, or, of course, no, they're just doing it for your own good, and all of that. And this is where it's so important to really be mindful of who your leaders are and who you're supporting. We have a presidential candidates are coming up. Who is the one that is going to hold the country for the highest good? And who is going to hold the country for their highest good? And it's pretty easy to take a look at that. Not from a political point of view, but just what's the track record? And so, in community, if we want to move forward in community, what does that even look like? What does that look like to move forward or to be more peaceful? We don't know. It boils down to our individual day-to-day interactions with one another. And at the end of the day, did we do our best? We pick communities for certain reasons. Some communities are rough and tumble. They really tell it as they are. Others are more subtle, more polished. And so you pick a community that will sand you, will polish your rough edges, and make you shine. And so picking a community is important also. When the community falls out of harmony, and I've been in one that fell out of harmony for years, and it took a master to come back in and to slap us around and say, stop your squabbling. There was the story of this hermit who lived up in the mountains. And the hermit was, he was one of those guys that, or gals, that really was an awake human being, very awake. And he just lived up there in solitude. Very close on the mountain on the other side was a monastery, and there were all these monks there. And they were not living in harmony. They had really fallen out. They were quarreling, and no one wanted to visit the monastery anymore. It had bad juju. And the leader recognized this and recognized that they were failing. They had lost their mission. They had lost their purpose. No one was committed to the work. What to do? And so the leader decided he would go try to find the hermit and ask for some advice. And after days of walking the mountain, he found the hermit. And the hermit smiled and invited him in and listened to the story of what was going on. And he said, I've got a solution. Go back and tell them that I told you this. One of you here at the monastery is the chosen one. One of you has already received the Christ consciousness. And I won't tell you who it is, but in a period of time I will reveal it. I'll come up and I will tell you. And so the elder went back and told the monks at the monastery, one of you is the chosen one. One of you has the Christ consciousness. Well, you know what happened. They started treating each other like each of them was the beloved. They imbued a kindness, their hearts opened, and guess what happened? It was felt down in the valley, and people started to come up to pray in the monastery. Young monks wanted to come and join. There was a Buddha field that had been established out of their kindness and out of their shift. This is what's called for if we want to bring peace in a community. If we really want to bring the peace and to be more peaceful, it starts with ourselves and how we treat ourselves and one another. It's just that easy. And it also goes back to what are my needs and what are my wants. My wants are very secondary to my needs. But once my needs are met, then everything is secondary. I can really be present to you because my needs are already met. I can see what are your needs? How can I uplift you? How can I be supportive to you? So it's an inside job. It's always been an inside job. So how peaceful are you? It's a silly question because it's always moving. In this moment, because at our core, we're always peaceful. And then there's the waves of life that come and stir the water and stir up the muck, and then we're no longer peaceful. But how quickly can you return to peace is the question. Because there's nothing that is static, it's always moving. But you can taste the peace within you as you just turn inward. As opposed to focusing outward, is that you just feel the body. And if you start to notice the center of your chest, that there is this beating muscle that is the rhythm of life. And as you tune into that beating muscle, for me at least, all my problems disappear. Because my thoughts disappear. There is a focus on the heart. And I don't know of a more peaceful place than to focus on the generosity of the heart that beats me and loves me, that I can't separate from. This is perhaps the doorway to the beloved. I don't know of another one. So kind of in concluding, the best way to practice is with the 2 ears. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth. That should give us a clue. So the deep listening, as we listen deeply to one another with our hearts, not just our ears, something happens. There is a connection that's built that's beyond mind, beyond thinking. Something happens in that interchange of deep listening to another human, or a pet, or a tree, or the clouds. Whenever we open, that's what I call deep listening, and just be available. The magic happens in that moment. And so, where do we go from here? We're already arrived. We already have everything within us. We know how to deep listen. It just takes practice. And that's the purpose of community, is to simply be with one another to the best we know how to be, and we'll get polished in the process. So let's take this into prayer. As we breathe into the gift of this body, as we breathe into the gift of our heart, the heart that is always available, never tiring, always responding to the challenge by increasing its beats and decreasing, always is appropriate to the flow of life. And so we honor the gift of this heart. We honor the recognition of this heart and what it represents. It representing the feeling tone of what it's like to give and to receive love, and what that feels like in our lives, and what it feels like to uplift somebody else. And so I anchor this for the new year, that we go forth with a renewed devotion and dedication to living an intentional life of giving and receiving love. Not needing to know the consequences, but just being genuine in our desire to give and receive love. And that is enough. It always has been. So for this and the more, I am so grateful as we release this prayer together by saying, Ashe, blessed be, and so it is.